Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today, our special guest is Cesar Barbosa. And Cesar Barbosa is the CEO of New Life Power Services. Hey Cesar, what's happening? What does New Life do? What's it all about? And it's also spelled N-U Life, New Life.
Yeah, I thank my older brother for that name. I didn't think he was going to be that astute, but it turned out to do well for us. We actually, Sean, are what we like to call in the commercial of solar. So we're maintenance, repair, and then decommissioning of commercial and industrial solar systems. And when appropriate, we can repower those solar systems. In short, that's what we do.
Oh, cool. So let's even talk about repowering, because I used to work for this company called Solar Universe, and they were doing like solar franchises and training. And so I would go and drive to Livermore, California 1 week a month and teach a class. And maybe it happened for about 5 years. And it was pretty cool. It was pretty fun. And they would load up people with a pallet, and they would just take like an HVAC person or electrician or whoever, teach them how to do solar. And then they would start their own business. And it was kind of cool. It seemed like a good business model. But then I think times change, the industry changes. Maybe there was less money in it for the franchise operator or something like that, because they changed their name from Solar Universe, and I was the instructor for Solar University, and then they changed it to Repower, and it has nothing to do with what your Repower is. But whenever people say they're repowering something, I'm like, Repower, like Solar Universe? That's kind of the way I think about it in my head. And then there was like, people got rich, they sold the company. Some professional CEO that knows nothing about solar, could never pass the NABCEP associate exam, comes in, shakes things down, owes people $1 million, turns it into a call center with all different people, kept the same name, kept the phone number and all that kind of stuff, made everybody really upset. And whoever that CEO was, if you're listening right now, stick it where the sun don't shine, buddy. I don't remember his name, because he's not worth remembering. I remember like they
Sean, I want to say that guy's my brother.
So that guy was your brother? Well, this call's over, Cesar.
I'm kidding. Yeah.
Where's my $400 or whatever it was that the guy owed me? Like, I went into they had like this call center that they turned it into a call center in Jack London Square in Oakland. And I found the address and I couldn't get in. So I tailgated the door. I waited just for somebody to go in. I walk in there. One face looked familiar, and they just like did their best to politely kick me out without having to call the cops. And,
Wow.
Probably just told me like, oh yeah, we'll get you your money. Just leave now, you sucker. So
Is that the company that was off of Vasco? Is that what you were doing the training?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I remember it. Yeah, I didn't know that whole story. I thought that they were just a solar installer. And then you're right. And then they just went away one day. I didn't know they had rebranded or turned it into a call center of sorts.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. And they were in a smaller building, and then they upgraded to a bigger building. I don't remember which one was Vasco. There was like 2 exits adjacent to each other over there in Livermore. But there was some good days, and the industry was going really fast. And then, I've seen that happen with other companies too, where it's sort of like people come in and they rate it, they file for bankruptcy, and they pay themselves a whole big old commission. So like the person who is the CEO will be like, I'm worth $10 million a year. And then the company goes bankrupt, and then it's their fault it went bankrupt because they paid themselves $10 million a year. And they don't care. They just liquidated a company and, dumped it out. Like that would be like me going like, I'm going to take over Apple, and then I'm going to like pay myself $1 trillion a year. And then Apple will go bankrupt in a year or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate truth. And I think that's the truth with a lot of industries, right? It's unfortunate in the photovoltaics because, I've been in the industry maybe not as long as you had. Like I got in 2008. ¿Hablas español?
Poquito.
Te voy a enseñar, amigo, un día. And we'll teach you one day, my friend.
Okay, yeah. I always wanted to learn, really bad. But
yeah, so I grew up in Livermore.
Oh, you did? You grew up in Livermore?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When I was brought up, I think I was like 2 years old when I was brought over. I was born in Guadalajara, Jalisco, home of the tequila and mariachi.
Yeah, I've known about that in my past life.
Okay.
And you know what? When I was in college, I was trying to figure out what to do, and I had this like VHS videotape that was from the University of Guadalajara Medical School, and I was like thinking of moving there.
Did you ever go?
Nope. Or else then you would be calling me doctor
Yeah.
or whatever, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like I'd be like
Doctor.
fighting some HMO or whatever it is, you know. I guess if you go to a foreign medical school, the board exam is harder, but it's all possible.
Yeah. So we actually relocated to Mexico a couple years ago. So we tried living the expat kind of life. There's a really beautiful, it's the biggest natural water lake in the country of Mexico. It's called Chapala. And it's in the southeast of Guadalajara, the city. It's just a beautiful expat community right up on the mountain. And so I told my wife, because at that time, to kind of point you back and talk a little bit about solar and how it kind of new life originated, we were decommissioning systems in 2017 at scale. So, I mean, we were doing portfolios of retail stores that systems just needed to come down. And then folks always ask me, well, what was wrong with them? A lot of things were wrong with them, but mostly the PPAs. Remember back then we were selling these PPAs in under 10 years. They just weren't penciling out, or I think really what happened, they were too complicated for the financiers and the owners to try to refinance. And so eventually they said, well, you know, what the heck, just rip them out. They're old anyways, they're degrading, and central inverters, they're like, we're band-aiding them. Let's just go all new. And so what turned into like one retail store turned into like a couple dozen. And we were brought to the races, and we said, hey, you know, there's something here. And kind of weaving it back to how we relocated to Mexico, what we were doing with those modules, because they were decent modules. I remember the very first store we decommissioned was a SunPower SPR 305 watt,
Wow.
right? So 8-9 years old, but generally still in really good condition.
Oh, I'd love a whole bunch of those. And so that's what repowering is to repower those modules instead of dumpstering them or crushing them up or whatever.
100%, 100%.
So it's not really recycling, because recycling sort of is like crushing it up, I guess, and repowering it is, you know, just turn it on some other place.
Yeah, and that was working well, Sean, for a while, but not so much anymore. We call that repurposing of used modules. Because you can imagine, you know, we've been repurposing modules at scale, and I don't mean just us, New Life, but here in North America, and certainly around the world now, where I think the market, the world has been flooded by repurposed modules. So it's not a viable market today.
Did I say something wrong? Because I think I said repowering when should have said repurposing, right?
Interchangeable words, but I think repurposing is the more formal name.
Okay. So repurposing is taking those modules that were used and then putting them somewhere else. Repowering, I guess, is where you have a PV system and then maybe you take the old modules off and put on some new ones. Is that?
Okay, so it's more than that. Sometimes you leave the panels altogether. Sometimes it can be the inverters. Sometimes it can be the combiner boxes. Sometimes it can be the racking on a ground mount systems. So repowering doesn't just mean the modules. It can mean everything or portions of it.
Could mean everything. So
It can mean everything or portions, yes.
So you rip out an entire ground mount, you keep your interconnection agreement, I guess, and then you go and replace all the equipment.
Ideally, that's when it works the best.
Repowering. And
Yes.
then repurposing is like, say at my mom's house, is I got the old solar modules from Solar Universe that I was just talking about. And we were doing training and they just had leftover ones or whatever. I don't know if it's repurposing if it was not installed ever, I guess, but they were used for training. But let's say if I took it off of somebody's roof and put it on another roof, then that's repurposing.
Sure. Yeah. Or there's another word which they call refurbish.
Refurbish.
Yeah. So now you're actually repairing portions of that module, be it the junction box, it could be the MC3s. Typically, you can't do anything about the backsheet, or in my opinion, you shouldn't really be messing with backsheets and the cells. But the junction boxes and the connectors, the diodes, perhaps, those things can be repaired and then repurposed. So you refurbish the module and then you repurpose it in a separate kind of system, whether it be off-grid, RV, or putting it back on some ground mount.
Man, we have so many different definitions. We've got repowering, refurbishing, repurposing, And what am I missing?
Oh, you want to go there? That's not even half of it.
Re.
Yeah.
So refurbish, repurpose, repower, recycle. That's what it is, the 4 ones.
And get this, and there's actually, I think, one of the federal agencies, they're coming out with publications, and we're working with them. We've done co-author publications with NREL, and we're working with someone else. The name escapes me. But now there's more terminology. So get this, there's now retrofit and there's repair as it relates to the repowering side of the thing, right? Because what we are kind of teaching these municipalities, because remember, Sean, a lot of these things got to go back to the AHA to get approved, right? And so you can imagine calling your local municipality and saying, hey, I'm going to repower the existing 1 megawatt that you have out there, on the highway. And 9 out of 10 times, they always think that we're just saying we're going to install a new system. So it takes us like 3 applications saying the exact same thing and 5 phone calls to explain to them, but no. There's already an existing system there. We're taking it off and then we're reinstalling with something new. And then they all kind of seem to scramble a little bit and say, whoa, well, this is new. We haven't seen this before. And we kind of have to walk through these jurisdictions to kind of explain to them whether the system is being decommissioned altogether and nothing is being put back in its place, or the system is being totally repowered, which is kind of a bigger project, or a repair or a retrofit of sorts. And that can be, for example, we're just going to replace the central SATCON inverter with new string inverters. That's it.
Wow, there's so many of these REs that you have right there. And not to forget about RE plus, renewable energy, all these REs, man. But let me just, I think so far you've told me 6 of them. And maybe we could even go over those just so people listening can get their language down, including myself, because I've not seen all 6 of these together. And I think I might be able to figure it out, but I don't have it as clear as you have it. So be my teacher. And I'm not sure which order to go in. So I'll just go. I have retrofit, repair, refurbish, recycle, repower, and repurpose. Does that sound like a good 6?
Sure.
So let's say, first of all, retrofit. Just kind of give me a quick synopsis of what that means.
I would call retrofit, we are redoing a portion of the system. For example, I would consider a retrofit replacing an as-is for as-is inverter at scale, right? If it's just one, then it's just service or an RMA. But if you're doing the mass system, then I would say like a mass repair or swap of a particular component.
Okay, so we've got the retrofit, and then after retrofit is repair.
Good. I'm glad we went there, because think about it like this. A retrofit is that we're physically taking components out and then doing something with them in return, but at scale, right? Where repair can be something as simple as repairing the wire management across the whole site, right? And by the way, there's another term I'll throw your way, which is kind of segue to that, remediation. Is what some of these asset managers call that as well. And that is more on the corrective maintenance side of the spectrum. So it's not so much swapping out components as it is repairing it and doing some kind of medium to large scale corrective maintenance is what I would call it.
Wow. Okay, so far we've covered retrofit, repair. We added remediation, so we're going to have 7 total. And then there is refurbish.
Refurbish, think about refurbishing like your, microwave or a television or some kind of an electronic, right? I mean, a lot of these words, John, we're adopting them from other industries. I don't think we've invented any of these specifically for renewables, but refurbishing is the act of re-evaluating a solar module specifically. I think this term is specific to modules. And I don't want to throw any other components out there, although I know that we're doing them at some scale, like inverters, right? We were retrofitting or refurbishing inverters, but I don't even want to throw that into the bucket, because unless you have the manufacturer sign off, we shouldn't really be doing that as private parties, right? But you have a lot of companies, and I'll throw one out there, which is really well known, a company called FabTech, right? And it's one of many, but a big practice of theirs is that they'll receive these used modules, and assuming that everything is good and it just needs a repair of the junction box, the lead, or the connector, it's something that physically can be done by a technician that wouldn't require the panel to be RE-UL listed or tested with some third-party accreditation. So we refurbish that module, and then we can send it off to its second life.
Wow, you even said RE-UL listed. Everything is re with you, isn't it, Cesar? All right.
Maybe it is.
And so we hit refurbish, and now we are at recycle.
Recycling. You must have not been born to not know what that term means. However, as it relates to the module, it does cause confusion, even with solar experts, because when I tell you, hey, I got 1,000 panels, what are we going to do with them? And I determine that it has to be recycled, you might be thinking that I'm going to give you money back for that because I'm going to send it to a recycling center and you're going to get paid just like you do with your beer can. But in essence, it's in reverse. It's similar, but in reverse, where you have to pay me for me to recycle your solar panel, right? And that is the practice of taking the solar panel to a facility, and then the facility has different ways to dismantle, separate those materials, whether it be the aluminum rail, the glass, which we know is 98% of the module in itself, a little bit of silver, a little bit of copper, and then they take those components and try to reuse them in a different life. But there's a cost to that, and it's not a cheap cost. Today's ranges can be somewhere between, when you're doing it at volume like we do, and we work with the largest recycling centers in the country, it can be anywhere from $7 to $15 a panel, and that excludes freight a lot of times, right? So you take a 1 megawatt facility, it really tends to move the needle in terms of what it's costing that system owner to get rid of that system.
Mm-hmm. Wow, we could go on. Let's do repower and repurpose and then go back to recycle, because that was kind of interesting. So how about repower?
Repower is kind of the more known buzzword in the industry right now, I would say. And that is essentially to take a legacy solar system and bring new components, new technology, maybe new engineering to yield some more life and more power out of that system. We use repower in a different kind of label of name because it usually is more invasive and requires more engineering, and a lot of times can trigger those NEM agreements or utility reapplications. Whereas the retrofit or repair, you probably wouldn't even have to go to the AHJ. If I was to say, hey, I'm going to manage wire this array and replace the MC4 connectors, you're not going to go to the city to pull a permit for that. But if I'm going to rip out a central inverter, throw in some new string inverters, I have to rewire the array. I may remove the combiner boxes and use those as pull boxes, but now I need new raceways. It starts becoming a bigger of a project. And so we use repower kind of in a bigger concept of a label.
Okay, you said remove when you were explaining that one too. So now the last one is repurpose out of our 7 that we're talking about.
I feel like you're going to label me the guy.
Yeah, you heard. It's pretty hard not to.
Hey, no pun
That'll
intended.
Make you like the most popular person at RE+, which is the biggest solar trade show in the United States.
Yeah, you would think, huh? I should get some royalties from announcing the RE. Repurpose, was that the last one?
Yes.
Repurpose, it just means to reuse that particular component in a different application. And mostly that is a term used for the panel as well, right? So we'll take an old panel off, and if it's in good condition, we used to send them to developing countries as a secondhand product. Like I said, that market is kind of flooded already, and it's hard to make sense of the freight cost. And so even modules that are 300 watts now, we just decommissioned a 1.6 megawatt here in California. It was like 7,305 watt panels, and we just could not find an off-taker because it's a lot of volume, it's a lot of freight. Yeah, you had your local folks pick up a pallet or two, but that doesn't really move the needle when you got 7,000 to have to find a home for. And so you end up now as a market ending up to have to send those to recycling. So anyways, repurposing means in the event that you still can, that you'll take that panel, put it on the off-grid application and RV, or send it to a developing country where they can yield a little bit more life.
Yeah, I'm assuming just since globally the price of PV is so low that it might be cheaper to get a brand new module for somebody that's not doing the tariffs in the United States than it would be to, send it overseas or somewhere,
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And so that there was a lot of those rewords. And so I wanted to also ask you, like, I wanted to go back, like I wanted to get through those 7: retrofit, repair, remediation, refurbish, recycle, repower, repurpose, to get through those. And then for recycling, I thought that's interesting. And I've seen it happen before, how you said that you pay. Like when I take my cans, you told me beer cans, but these days it's going to be something else. And so I'm going to take those cans back and they are going to pay me, something for those cans. But for doing it for a solar module, you have to pay them. And I think you said even sometimes it's like over $7, something like that. So why is that? Like, why do you have to pay to give something away that I think is valuable?
Yeah, the cost, in simplest words, the energy, the cost to dismantle those raw materials is a very intense process. If you haven't had the chance to visit one of these facilities, you should. But I mean, these are industrial machineries, big power plant facilities with a lot of moving parts. That module, either whether it's chemical or shattered kind of physical destruction, which is kind of what I've seen the most here in North America. It's a lot of energy to dismantle the process. And the reality is that 98% of it is glass, right? Mm-hmm. And so you couple that with the cost of freight, it adds up a lot. And so today, I mean, I remember 2017 when we were decommissioning at scale, I think we were paying somewhere around $21 to $25 a panel, excluding freight. And today we've seen some of these facilities go down as far as $7 to $10, but that's also very contingent on their appetite for receiving more volume, because it becomes a volatile of a market, right? If the facility has no modules today, they need to keep their process going. And so they might reduce the cost to receive your order. But if there's a big hailstorm in Texas and now they got, 50,000 panels that need to be processed within the next 90 days to 6 months, they're going to uptick their price because they're okay with volume. So it's become a bit of a tricky market and cost assumptions when you're looking at these projects today. But yeah, that's why there's a cost to that, answer your question. The energy to dismantle that, it's high.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the alternative would be to throw it in a dumpster like they do with like a lot of things, like probably someday when this sliding glass door in front of me is old, somebody will throw in a dumpster, I guess, like maybe the window cracks or something like that. We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's Solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. One time I was at SNEC in Shanghai, that's the world's largest solar conference, and I was introducing a speaker, and he was the guy that runs PV Cycle. And so they've been recycling in Europe for a long time. And I was asking him, like, how toxic are these crystalline silicon solar modules? And he said, that phone that everybody has in their pocket, it's way more toxic than any solar module. So solar modules are pretty low on the toxicity scale. So even if they do get thrown in the landfill, which is like, some people are always looking for a reason to pick on solar, and they're like, it's going to pollute the world with junk solar modules and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, I don't know, there's a lot worse things you could be burying in a landfill, I think.
I 100% agree. And that was actually a pretty contentious argument back in the day, because there was a lot of folks who were arguing that the, leaching of these materials was going to be bad for our environment. And you're right, the studies came back. And even if you dumped thousands of panels in a concentrated area, the percentage of leakage through that very minimal hazard was almost nothing, right? And so I don't think that's the argument today. And the other thing, Sean, and one of the things I appreciate about you, because you keep it real, like we like to say, a lot of also folks have argued or made the argument that most of the panels are going to landfill. It's really hard for me to believe that, because I'll tell you, here in California, I don't know anybody. I'm not saying that we're the only decommissioning outfit here in California, but I do think we were one of the first ones to start decommissioning at scale. I've never taken a panel to a landfill, not because I haven't wanted to, but because, first of all, you can imagine when they first had the first deal, they came to us, the owner, and it was a large reputable power player, Fortune 100s. You're going to appreciate this. So when they came to us, they said, either here's the rooftop, here's a budget to take these panels and get rid of them. Okay, we even a quarter of recycling. Let's say it's, I don't know, maybe $1 to $5 a panel, or it was, where recycling can be 7 to 15. So generally the data shows that it's a lot cheaper to landfill. But even then, when we were looking to landfill, there was two things that happened. One, I couldn't fathom the idea of me pulling in with like 7 semi truckloads, backing them up into a landfill and just dumping a bunch of solar panels. And I'm like, that for sure is going to get me on Channel 2 News. So I'm not doing that. And so what actually ended up happening, you'll appreciate that was the first year that SPI was in Mexico City, right? And so I tell the owner, hey, hold on a sec. First of all, what's wrong with these panels? Well, there's nothing wrong with them, but what are we going to do with them? Solar recycling wasn't even a thing. There wasn't even a single solar recycler, I believe, at least no one that I had known of, that was able to recycle panels through an accredited process. And so I said, well, hold on, let me find something out while we figure out the rest of the pricing and get all our ducks in a row. So I go to the solar conference in Mexico. And mind you, as you know, right, most countries, or some countries, I should say, could are a few years behind the United States in some technologies. It's certainly the case with Latin America and Mexico. I would argue that at that time, Mexico was maybe 5, if not more years behind in renewables that the United States were. And so when for us, O&M was already a thing. For them, that terminology had just started to pop into their head. Sure enough, they weren't going to be thinking of solar end of life. Long story short, I go to Mexico and I say, hey, are you guys interested in used solar panels? And they look at me like, the heck? Used solar panels? Why would you have used solar panels? So I walk through the whole scenario, 10-year PPAs, doesn't make sense, can't figure out the financing, and they just want to go on the old together. 300-watt panels, nothing wrong with them. They got another 10 years easy. I'll give you a good price. I go back to the owner who had collected us to do the work, and I said, here's your budget, and it was like $10,000 or something. Here's your budget to get rid of these panels, and here's an additional $10,000 because we found a buyer in Latin America. And they look at me and they say, wow, we weren't expecting that. Here's 10 more stores. And just like that, new life is born, at least in my head. And I said, no, there's something here. This is just the beginning of what we're going to start seeing. And so we were able to take all those panels to Latin America. We were sending them to Africa, to the Middle East. But as the industry around the world develops and matures, we start seeing the repurposing of these modules scale up quite significantly. And so it constrains the ability to find off-takers. So now, like I said, now we find ourselves having to recycle most of the systems we decommission.
So if you think about a solar module, it's mostly made out of just glass, aluminum, crystal. I mean, it's stuff that's sort of like a window or a sliding glass door. It could last a long time. I have Arco solar modules from the 80s, and they work great. They're like, they don't have the exact same efficiency as a modern module, but they still work, and they would still make perfect sine waves to feed the grid and all that kind of stuff. So it always seemed silly to me for people just like having a perfectly good working solar system and just go like, I'm going to replace it. Like, why not just add another one? Like, it's like it used to be not feasible to put solar on the north side of your roof. Now it's getting that way. You might make 2/3 of the electricity on the north that you make on the south. Put the old stuff on the north, put the new stuff on the south, and you're making more electricity. And then that's sort of repurposing it just to the other side of your house. And it just seems a shame to take something that works perfectly good and throw it away. I mean, I can understand if something gets hail damage or somebody drove into it and it gets cracked, or they were doing gun practice, or all that kind of stuff. Like, I can understand. And I think that's just the way to go. Like, I'm making this solar training center here, and I want to do that, repurpose a bunch of stuff. To me, it doesn't really make sense. There's a guy that I know that's just like an electrician for movie sets. And so he knows a little bit about wiring, and he's a, do-it-yourselfer DIYer. And he went down to the dump, and I think they were selling them for like $20 a piece. And then he's about to leave, and he's like, do you want the rest of them for free? And I have another friend that was getting 600 kilowatts of 20-year-old SunPower power guard, and he got a quote to take it away for $100,000. And so I've got a new business proposition. Let's go into business. Here it is. You have somebody pay you whatever it is, $10 a module to get rid of it. Then we go like, okay, we collect the money. Then we go put an ad on Craigslist, free solar. Meet me at the parking lot of Walmart or wherever it is where you're taking it off. And then that way we get rid of it all that way. So are we in business?
Yeah, look, if you would have said that to me, 15 years ago, which is what the solar was, the Wild Wild West, I'd say we're in business. But we know that things are the red tape and the bureaucracy with, I mean, let me put it this way. Are you comfortable putting a 10-year-old panel on grandma's wooden shack? I mean, it makes you think at least, right? I think twice. I'm like, am I really going to put my grandma at risk like that?
Oh, I use like the old training modules that we, beat up pretty good, and they're on my mom's house right now. So she's not my grandma, she's my kid's grandma. And
so you would, and I would, because I'm installing used panels on my house, right?
Sometimes the older ones are better,
Sometimes they are, yeah. But now you have asked a banker or an investor, one of these folks who are all about liability. Hey, we want to give away these panels. They start looking at the liability behind it. Okay, if that turns on fire, the MC4 connector fails, they track that serial number back to us. What are the chances that we can get in trouble? Even if it's minute, no, not worth it. How much is it going to cost to get rid of it?
Well, yeah, and then the ones that I stuck on my mom's house, I use microinverters, or you could use DC to DC converters, and that makes it, I think, perfectly safe. I've never heard of one single module alone being a danger, I actually got $20 used microinverters for her house on eBay also, and they're, they still have the 25-year warranty, and they seem to be working too. I just had a couple of them that failed.
Yeah, in a way, you're right. I mean, if you have a module that's 10 years old and it's perfectly good shape, you'd almost argue that it's safer than buying a brand new panel from another, country, knowing that, we've had what we call infant rate failures, right? Coming straight out of the factory. It's almost like, hey, the devil I know versus the devil I don't know. Yeah, I'll take this one, right? So there's an argument to be made for that. I mean, I'm getting those used panels on my house just to make a statement.
Mm-hmm. And then the other way is like I load up my truck full of used solar modules that somebody paid me $10 a piece, and then I just park it in a dangerous neighborhood where people will steal it. Is that you think?
Yeah. Yeah, sounds like a weekend job.
And
to me.
They might get used too.
Yeah, I mean, look, if it wasn't, I think the DOE, the number is about 1 million tons of silicon having to be basically recycled by, 2030? Over 1 million tons.
Like, I kind of imagine the silicon from the solar cells would be harder to turn into raw silicon than just like starting over and digging it up in the ground. It's like silicon is the second most abundant element in the Earth's crust. Like, I'm not 100% sure, but it just seems to me that it would be probably less expensive to start from scratch than it would be to, like when you crush up these solar cells, it's got like boron and phosphorus and silver and all these different things. They're kind of mixed together.
100%. That's why there's a heavy cost to recycle the panel today.
Mm-hmm.
We're hopeful, Sean, that, 5-10 years from today, that we have the technology to be able to figure that solution out. But you're right, with the cost of new panels today, I agree. It seems a lot cheaper and easier to just make a new panel than have to figure out how to refurbish or repurpose these existing panels. I do know that there are companies out there who are already working on them. How close they are to it, they'll all tell you that they're really close, but I would say that we're still several years out.
Cool. Well, I think what you're doing is great. So what's your favorite reword?
What's my favorite reword? Yeah, I think there's something to be said about repowering America's aging solar infrastructure. I think it's a noble cause. I put in a very controversial post the other day on LinkedIn that kind of went viral. I'll send it to you. I had like several 100,000 impressions. I have a pretty wild prediction. And this prediction comes from like over a decade of being in this particular sector of renewables, right? So I installed it for several years, and then I've been in the repair remediation for the last 10, 13 years. So I'm seeing it firsthand. It's my business, basically. I think that at least 50% of the systems that we've installed prior to 2016 will either underperform or not operate by 2030, right? And then when I say that, it's like, whoa, Cesar, that's a big number. it's not only a big number in percentages of failure, but it's also a huge number in terms of cost. What if I told you, Sean, that I am currently doing portfolios of just going around and replacing MC4 connectors on large big box retail stores, nothing else, right? We're just going around snipping old uncompatible connectors, and the POs are $500,000. Right? And we're not even talking about degradation of wire. We're not talking about the inverters. We're not talking about the panels that have thermal vents. It's just junction box lids across massive portfolios where we have to go and glue up new lids, right? So there's millions and millions of dollars on the most minute remediation and repair happening at scale. And we're not even talking about engineering. We're not even talking about poor installation or workmanship, because we hype the solar, the incentives, a great thing to catalyst us to renewables, but also cause, because I'm an electrician by trade, right? I'm an electrician by trade. I'm a journeyman electrician license, and I'm a C-train contractor and NABCEP associate. So I built these things with my hand.
Awesome.
I've seen the guys build it next to me. And at the boom of it, let's be honest, we had a huge undertrained crews installing systems, faster than we could keep up. And so now I'm seeing the effects of that, and it's quite daunting. For me, it's an opportunity. I make really good money doing it. But in terms of what we were promising as an industry, I think quite frankly, we could have done a lot better. And so I'm saying with folks, and something that I appreciate about you, I like to look at things in an optimistic way. With the BBB now being announced, I'm saying, hey, maybe this is a reality check, right? For those of us that are really in it for the long haul, we're going to find a way to survive. Those that were just here on vacation, they're going to jump right back into a new industry. But there's also 100 gigawatts that we've installed that needs our attention. Why don't we take a moment to go back? Because there's a lot of money and a lot of opportunity to repower these systems, or salvage them at least, so that they're not sitting ducks, a couple of years from now with wires hanging at an elementary school and the whole half of the system is offline.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good reason to get the NABCEP PV Commissioning and Maintenance Specialist certification, which I just happen to have a class for, an exam prep class for that. So a good way to weather that loss of the 30% tax credit. And so one of the things that happens with the solar industry, the solar coaster, as they call it, is a lot of times incentives and things, change and stop all at once instead of going down smoothly. So instead of going like 30%, 29, 28, 27, it goes 30 to 0. And the industry is going to keep growing if you zoom out. But in the short term, that's a perfect time. It's like, okay, we just finished all this stuff. This will be a few years from now when the tax credits run out and and we're finished installing the projects that we were working on the tax credits with. And also by then we might have a different law that changes it. That'll be, and it might even be called the Trump 30% tax credit, that's a good way to push it through. But anyway, it's just like what will happen is we'll have to weather it. And there's all these systems that we threw up so fast over the years when there's like that, things were just moving so fast that they need tune-ups. You need to get worked on. And I really think that you could take a 30-year-old system, and if you had the time, you could make it work. Some of these systems, I was even thinking, like I was doing work up in Ontario, Canada, when they had this feed-in tariff around 2008 to 2010. It was like 80 cents a kilowatt hour for some of these systems. Gosh. So 2010 to 2030, they're getting 80 cents a kilowatt hour. That would be so worth it to go up there right now and just really tune that thing up and polish it up and make sure that that thing is working as efficient as possible. Replace whatever they allow you to replace. That's a ton of money, 80 cents a kilowatt hour. And some of these big projects too, they're on these like 20-year PPAs, things like that. So they're getting money that was calculated like 10 years ago that would have another 10 years. And all the more reason to keep that thing going.
100%. And so here's how you do it. This is how you do it, right? This is how to look at the repowering side of solar so that you can maximize those original agreements that you're talking about. And that's why, in a way, the terminology, all those REs that I mentioned, because I'm the king of RE, it's important because I think those terms are going to start being adopted. And let me give you an example. So if the system is totally failed or potentially a liability, the utility will allow you to repower that system with an increase of about 10% of its original output and still keep the original utility agreements, right? And so that's massive. If you're able to bring in a whole new system, bigger wattage panels, new inverters, new wiring, but keep that original NEM agreement, and then maybe throw some energy storage, you're off to the races.
So when you say that you can increase it by 10%, would that be like the AC side, the DC side, both?
Yeah, I mean, every utility is different. I'm talking just specifically here in the California area, which is where we're from. Yeah, it's both. It's kind of, they look at it in kind of both DC and AC, yeah. And so it gets tricky because, and they do a pretty good job of interviewing the system or assessing the system to see if what you're saying is true. But they don't want you to repower under the original agreements, right? They don't want that at all. And so you have to prove to them that you're not doing it just to yield more power or increase the output. You're doing it because it's a non-performing asset or even a liability, right? And so that's where you need a professional assessor like us. We'll go out, we'll look at the performance of the system. We can do a site assessment. We'll run a rough order magnitude estimate. This is essentially what developers come to us. They'll say, hey, I got this site or this bulk of sites. Some of them doing okay, some of them not so much. We need to start forecasting our financials. We don't know where to start. The EPC, who we worked with in the past, we asked them for a quote 2 months ago. They haven't gotten back to us. Or the number that they gave us was like kind of we like to say an FU price as a contractor, right? And that's because up until now, the EPCs, they've looked at these repowering kind of as a burden when they're so busy to get all these systems across the finish line. And so a firm like us that specializes in assessing these systems will tell you, okay, through our decade of experience of looking at these systems, you don't have to replace this. You don't have to replace that. You definitely have to replace this. And here's a general cost for that. If that looks good, then we can help you with value engineering, preliminary design. And if that looks good, we can do execution or owner's rep oversight, right? And Sean, we don't do a new install. We don't even do O&M. It's specifically decommissioning and repowering. And then all of those in between, except we're, of course, recycling. We're not a recycling facility. But that's the name of the game. Try to maximize those original agreements while bringing your system back to life, hence the name New Life Power.
Awesome, awesome. You know, I thought of one other way to repurpose, I think you might call it, is turn into furniture. Like make a little, I've seen like ping pong tables out of solar modules. I've seen like people take old power meters, you know, the ones that spin, and put them in a lamp. And then you turn the light on and the thing spins. Maybe now with our really efficient light bulbs, it might be harder to see the thing spin. Maybe you could run the wire, loop it around a few times or something like that. I'm not sure. But there'd be like all kinds of like art projects you could do. Like I'm working on this building right now. I have a north facing balcony. It's a solar training center. And I was thinking about like, hey, what if I just took some old solar modules, hung them on there, even if they weren't plugged in? Then I was thinking about that, like, how do you do rapid shutdown for that? You could just put a sign up that says rapid shutdown initiated. Like, so the firefighters don't get afraid to go to the building because if it's not hooked up to anything. And of course, maybe it is not smart to not hook it up to anything, but maybe if I hooked them all in parallel, I would never have enough voltage to go above that 80 volts. So you just always are complying with rapid shutdown. And I'll have to think more about that. Those are some things that I wake up in the middle of the night thinking of, you know.
Yeah, I believe in, and that's what makes you Sean White. Matter of fact, let's already put that into a new article in the NEC.
Thanks. Thanks, Cesar. Awesome. So like, how do people do business with you? Like, where do people find you, and what's your area where you work?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Cesar Barbosa. I'm wearing a cowboy hat. Or you can go to our website and reach out to us. We are based here out of California. We self-perform work here in California from San Diego all the way to Eureka, but we offer review assessments nationwide and then project oversight nationwide. We have vetted local contractors, partners of ours. If the work needs execution, we can hit all 50 states, not a problem. But LinkedIn is the easiest way to get a hold of me, and we'll talk.
Yeah. And I'm looking at your LinkedIn page right now. It's got like some cool pictures cycling through of some of these jobs that you've been working with. And the name of your company is called New Life. And you know what's kind of weird is I was just looking at your logo, And it does look a little bit like that Repower logo from that company that I used to get paychecks from that was called Solar Universe before. But I do see you all over LinkedIn. You were just saying you wrote some good articles there. We'll try to put some of the, like your LinkedIn and some of the articles that you wrote on the show notes for this show. And I've learned a lot about all these re's. And now I have more reason to reason to live, reason to know about all the re's. I'll be thinking more about it when I go to Repower.
Yeah, you heard it here first. I can't believe it, Sean, that this little installer gets to teach the great Sean White about the re's of solar.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah. So, any other thing that you want to talk about or cover?
No, I'm good, Sean. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having the platform, and get ready for this new era of solar. It's going to be interesting, right? I think end of life. There's a study that's calling end of life the $100 billion opportunity worldwide. The decommissioning, repowering, and recycling of photovoltaics is going to be a massive challenge. But with every great challenge is an opportunity, as Spider-Man once said, or was that Superman? Superman.
Well, I challenge you to make it a $300 billion opportunity, and then you'll be the richest person in the world.
Oh, no, man. Revenues for the ego, profits for the family. That's what I focus on.
All right.
A little bit of the cake is all we need.
Okay, sounds really good. So thank you so much, Cesar Barbosa, and thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. And if you were listening carefully, make sure to get your NABCEP certification, such as your NABCEP PV-CMS. That's the PV Commissioning and Maintenance Specialist certification. And then maybe somebody like Cesar Barbosa will hire you because he's going to be so busy, because there are hundreds of billions of dollars out there waiting to be had, and this whole industry is going to start pivoting more in Cesar's direction, because so much solar has been installed now that there's solar that needs to be tuned up. So get your solar tuned up, get all those rewords to it.